Today is February 19th, 2024. This is episode 39 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I am joined by Joe Meade. Today, Joe and I will hit on a couple of the football headlines before getting into a couple of the basketball headlines that we didn't exactly see coming. But first, Joe, we'll go to football for a short time before we'll swing it over to basketball, so take it away.
Yeah, I think a lot of questions, and this is actually funny. I think we should have done this from the beginning, is during football season, we got a lot of basketball questions. And now, as football news never dies down, but gets a little less and less, I think we should field some questions. So a lot of these are saved up from a few weeks, but this one's actually pretty recent. This is from Parker. I assume he's a USC or UCLA fan, got a Lakers logo here. Yesterday on Josh Pate's show, he talked about Todd Lynn, who's funnily enough old UCLA D coordinator who's at USC now. I think he is the most important coordinator in this conference. No, short answer. Do I think he's probably top five, easily most important? Probably.
May have lost Joe.
Oh,
he's back.
Because he's got to be the guy that. Yep. Sorry about that, everyone. No, I think before I got cut off, I think Todd Lynn's probably a top five most important coordinator in this conference. To say number one would be pretty dramatic. And if this Sean, I think I'll you.
Yeah, you're a little choppy. We're getting some of it, but I think it's okay now. Yeah, I can see now.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah, no, I think definitely Chip Kelly's probably number one, simply because he holds the key in the Michigan-Ohio State game, and frankly, he holds the key to Ohio State playing Oregon, which is in the middle of October. So definitely offenses and defenses he has experience with. So especially Oregon. If you think of the top four Big Ten contenders, it's Oregon, Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State, according to Vegas. So Ohio State plays all three of those teams this year. So that's why he's probably the most important, because Vegas is favoring them in most of those games. And with all the offensive weapons they have, he's going to be the most important coordinator in this conference. But should USC's defense piece it together, in an ideal world for them, Todd Lynn is probably going to be top two most important coordinators in that case. Sean, we have another question. This one's a rather odd one to talk about in February, but I mean, you could even have a stab at this if you want. Who do you think could be a surprise team in the Big Ten? I'm going to leave out West, just Big Ten in general, since we are going divisionless in 24. Not even trying to be a homer here. I think Rutgers could surprise a lot of people. You look at that schedule, and I'm not going to read it off because it's still 7 months in advance. Just look at Rutgers' 2024 schedule. There's a way they could get 6 guaranteed wins, especially if they beat Virginia Tech. There's a way they could get 7, 8 wins, which in this new Big Ten where, perhaps it provides even more opportunity for them. Unlike the West teams, they played the hardest schedule. They played Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State, and on certain years, Michigan State when they were good. So, maybe Rutgers surprises some people. I don't think you'll see them in contention for the 12-team playoff, but, perhaps they'll spoil a few teams' chances at the 12-team playoff. So that's certainly one. Sean, you have any?
I would just like to, how many wins a team has in this new look Big Ten is not going to be that indicative of how good of a football team they are. Schedules are going to be incredibly imbalanced. And
absolutely,
we can take a stab at who we think has the tough schedules now. We tried that in basketball. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. You could have a great schedule on paper, but a couple of the teams that you think are not going to be good turn out to be good, and you're going to lose a lot of games. But I think Rutgers is probably a good one. Joe, you obviously know more about what the teams are going to look like than me, but it doesn't seem too unrealistic to get to 8 wins for Rutgers, which is more than we could have said in any season, really, since since they joined the Big Ten.
Absolutely. And, we're going to end just with this last one because I think we need to talk a majority about basketball since we are knocking on March pretty soon. This one, I can't pronounce this name. gonna go with Rhodey. Sorry if I get that wrong. You could tell me how it's pronounced if I mess that up. Do you think Wisconsin is under an immense amount of pressure this year, and particularly Wisconsin football? I think immense would be pretty dramatic. I would say they have to do better than 7 or 8 wins, which is what they pretty much were this year. I think a lot of people favored them to win the West this year. I think that was somewhat unfair for a first year coach where they were implementing a whole new offense and a whole new philosophy. Um, their schedule is really tough though. They play Alabama at third week of the season, play USC, play Penn State, play at Iowa, Oregon. They do luckily avoid Michigan and Ohio State, but I mean it's not much of a reprieve. So I think I listed off 4 games there that they won't be favored in, and I think they got to win at least one of them without dropping a game they're going to be favored in, like against a Purdue or against a Rutgers. So I think this is a really big year for Wisconsin. I do think they fans would be very encouraged if they contended for the 12-team playoff. So with that said, Sean, should they contend for the 12-team playoff, I think most of their fans are going to be reasonably happy, but they just can't take a step back. They have to show at least one more win than last year. So getting 8-4 with a signature win or 9-3, that's what Badger football fans are going to be looking for. But Sean, I'm going to give the floor to you now. Let's talk some basketball.
So Joe, probably going to take up most of this segment, and it probably deserves to. One of the biggest headlines, not only in college hoops, but all of sports yesterday. Ohio State and Jake Diebler's first game in charge as interim head coach. They knocked down the Giants. Number 2, Purdue, cannot go into Columbus and get a victory. It was the first game after they fired Chris Holtmann. What a lot of things we can talk about for this one, but before we get into it a little further, thoughts on the game.
I think just big picture as an Ohio State fan, I'm not talking big picture into the future. I'm thinking of all the demons you probably exercised for the last 2 years. There's been plenty of games, even going back to the Purdue game last year for Ohio State, where they've led or pretty much contended the entire game. Then the last 5 minutes, they would collapse, similar to the way your rivals up north do every game. So for them to finish that out, they played phenomenal in the first half. And I don't even think they played all that well in the second. They certainly let Purdue tie it up late, but making timely shots. Jamison battle. I think, you could debate on certain calls. The battle foul, some Purdue fans were complaining about the no call on ED. With all that said, though, Sean, Ohio State stuck it out. Purdue had plenty of chances to capitalize at the end. And, to their discredit and Ohio State's credit, they just finished the game. And I think that's probably the loudest Value City Arena has been probably since I can't think, Sean, maybe 2018, Chris Holtmann's first year. They really haven't had a signature home win like this in a while. I know they beat Duke in 2021 and rushed the floor, but a game like this late, and for a team that frankly has nothing to play for but the NIT, I think that's a really good sign. I don't know if this puts Diebler in the running long term, but at least it starts a conversation. So with that, Sean, I'll give it right back to you.
Yeah, I'm going to read out a ton of stats here, Joe, and then we can talk about some things long-term about both these teams. Purdue was plus 13 in rebounds and plus 10 from the free throw line, which is pretty normal for them. They went 20 of 20 from the free throw line, which is the 5th time in the Matt Painter era that they have not missed a free throw. They've lost all 5 of those games. Pretty interesting. Now, some of those are 5 for 5, 6 for 6, but 20 for 20. It's not as if Ohio State fouled them every possession and they missed a ton of free throws. That certainly wasn't the case. I watched most of this one. I never thought Ohio State was going to win the game. Even when they're up 7, Lance Jones hits a 3. You always thought Purdue was just going to win it, and they didn't. Props to Jamison Battle, had some big shots. Bruce Thornton with 22. But here's a stat that I want to ask you about. Purdue, number 4 in the country in three-point field goal percentage. They take 9 threes against the team in the 300s in three-point field goal defense. That is a coaching mistake from my end. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I thought that was pretty strange and frankly pretty silly. And I could use, frankly, a lot of other words that this dictionary might have. So, Sean, I don't think I think you're going to ask me next whether there's reason for worry for Purdue. Probably not in terms of winning the Big Ten, but this is just something we've seen years and years before, and I don't know if Purdue fans are feeling this. Maybe you can tell us in our comments or DMs. Uh, is this something that's going to come back to bite them? Not taking threes, falling behind in the first half, and I don't think Purdue played tight at all in the second half, but you know, for a team like Purdue, with all the expectations they're going to have going into the tournament, no matter what, falling down big, like double digits, like they did in the first half, in front of a crowd, frankly, no one at that site, no matter where they play at in March, sure, maybe the first round it's going to be mostly Purdue fans. By the second round, you're playing a team that's going to be pretty popular or someone that just the fans are going to get behind. So they're going to have to know, they're going to have to learn eventually how to run with the bumps and the bruises. Because in the Wisconsin game and with all the other games they've won on the road, they've really never fell behind huge. And sure, a lot of teams don't win coming back from 10, 15, but Ohio State's one of those teams in this conference that you can easily do it against. And I understand they had the coaching change. There's a charged up crowd. With all this said, Sean, I think that's one thing Purdue's going to be very weak at in the tournament, and that's something they're going to have to address within these next few weeks. Because other than that, they've been nothing short of spectacular this year, but definitely a flaw. I think you centered it more on the threes, but that's just something as a fan and as someone who's watched the Big Ten my whole life has picked up on.
So here's another stat, Joe. Purdue took 33 field goal attempts that were, I got this from a tweet. I can't remember it exactly right now who said it, but they took 33 shots from two that were not Zach Edey. So 33 non-3 or Edey shots. That can't happen. I mean, Akpara has a little bit of length to bother the inside, but he played less than 20 minutes. Zed Key was in there most of the time on Edey. So get it into Edey or shoot threes. I mean, you have a couple of layups here and there, but Lawyer needs to shoot the ball when he's in there, or they need to do something different. I think that's a Painter mistake. You don't see him very often get out-coached, but especially somebody who's, coached one more game than we have, Joe, combined. So I think this is a Painter mistake. Maybe he was just trying something different. But just like that, Joe, they just have a one-game lead in the Big Ten, and they go to Illinois, who's one game behind them right now. So I think there's at least a chance that Illinois can get a share of this title. But any thoughts on the stat that I just said, and then after we can get into talking about Fletcher Lawyer a little bit.
I think if they don't learn their lesson after this in terms of not taking threes and not giving the ball to Edey that many times in a game where Edey wasn't really in much foul trouble, or to our knowledge, maybe we don't know something as we shoot this on Monday night, was dealing with any kind of health complication, it makes zero sense. So I think they'll look at that today in film, and they've probably looked at it right after the game on the bus, that just can't happen again. So if it does, I don't have to say what happens because everyone knows in this country and in this conference what will happen. So I don't want to fearmonger at all. I just think they've been so phenomenal this year that, and yes, they've had off games, but everyone does. They've been so good this year that that's something they have to pinpoint and fix. And that's, of all the issues you could have, that's a glaring one right there. So get it fixed, but I think it definitely can be done.
So the next thing, Joe, Fletcher Lawyer, his minutes have decreased recently. He's only had double digits twice in the last 8 games. This sort of happened last year too. Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith really hit that freshman wall, and Purdue lost 4 of their last 6 games going into the Big Ten tournament, which they did win, but Lawyer is a liability defensively, and if he's not scoring, it's hard for Matt Painter to keep him out there. So if you're Painter, do you get him off the floor more, or do you just let him go through some of this stuff, try and build his confidence back? Because he did hang 27 on Tennessee and Marquette. No, Tennessee and Arizona. But at this point, he's almost unplayable at times with his inability to affect the game on both sides of the ball.
I think they're going to just have to play him because his scoring ability is such a threat. And eventually we've seen teams do it, is as much as they're going to try to take Edey out of the game, he is a guy that can make you pay from deep. So losing one of those guys on the floor, even if it's for 5 to 6 minutes less a game, I think could be, I don't want to say costly, but could be detriment. It's the same thing. It could just inhibit your chances of winning a game.
Fletcher Lawyer, Joe, is 43% from three. He's got to be taking
Yeah,
7 or 8 threes a game.
absolutely. And if he's out there 5 to 6 minutes less a game, that probably takes away one or two of his attempts, which, as we know, margin for error and margin of victory, especially if they want to make a deep run, which is what Purdue is of and their expectation is, margin for error is that thin. And that's 1 3, 1 2 minute stretch where he's not in there.
Yeah, so Joe, last thing about Purdue here is that they are. I did drop them to the number 2 seed. We'll get to bracketology at the end. Number 2 overall seed. That won't change much. UConn will still pick the East region. They'll still be in the same place. They're likely to get Indianapolis for their first round game, and round of 64 game. Now, with their history in games in games against double-digit seeds, do you think it's a bad thing that they're going to primarily be playing in front of their home fans? Maybe that uneasiness does get to them. It definitely did last year. Do you think it's a bad thing that they might be playing in front of their home fans mostly?
I certainly wouldn't be a bad thing at all. In terms of Purdue in Indianapolis, I think they'll be charged up. It's not even a matter of that, Sean. I really think it's come the Sweet 16 or Elite Eight what's going to happen. I think at this point it would take, even if they lost the rest of their games, it'd take I think it's virtually impossible for them to not be in Indianapolis at this point, right, Sean? I'm just trying to go through the scenarios.
Well, they'd have to drop off the one line.
Yeah.
Because those number 1 seeds get to pick where they want to, or the site that's closest to them in the order of the seeds, and that's why that matters. Even though that you may be going to the South region, well, you got to win 2 games to get to the South regional. But the other sites here, I've got them up: Brooklyn, New York. Likely UConn will go there either way. Indy, Omaha, Nebraska wouldn't be terrible for Purdue. Pittsburgh, Salt Lake City, Spokane, and Memphis, Tennessee. So really 2 that you kind of want there if you're Purdue. But they're going to be playing a team that they're way better than, and then a team that they're definitely better than in the first 2 games. But there's another rule that if you are a top 3 seed in the tournament, I believe this is new for this year, the opponent cannot be within 75 miles of your site. So, for example, Eastern Washington is going to be in that. If they win their conference tournament, they're close enough to Spokane. They can't go to Spokane. So if there is like a 15 or a 16 seed that is in Indiana, they cannot go to Indy to play Purdue, which is tough for them. But it is time to start looking at tournament sites. We've got the East Regional in Boston. Midwest Regional is in Detroit. South Regional in Dallas. And the West Regional is in L.A. So, Vince, if you're starting to look forward to seeing your team in March, there's only a couple of teams in the Big Ten that can definitely say that so far, but it's definitely something to look at. Purdue likely will be playing in Indy, and they did lose to. What do you remember where that FDU game was last year, Joe? I'm gonna look it up real quick.
Now. Yeah.
If it was
I
at
think that's
Gainbridge,
the one thing people don't consider.
if it was at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, I'm officially.
No, it's in
worried for
Columbus.
Purdue. Okay.
Columbus, Ohio.
So it was in Ohio at the Nationwide Arena. That is not Ohio State?
That's where the Blue Jackets play.
Okay.
Yep.
So all right, if they had lost in Indy, they might be picking Omaha. Just
the only time they've lost
vibes.
in Indy was in the COVID year to North Texas. So
okay, yeah, that was at Lucas Oil. So
yeah.
Something to look forward to. A lot of bracketologists pick where they think the locations will be. There's no reason to do that because no time. But so if you're seeing people pick matchups, or the locations, it's not random. It's based on all that. So Joe, we're going to move into another team here. We are just Slightly under 20 minutes, so we're doing good on time. A team that we thought could challenge Purdue for this Big Ten title just a couple weeks ago is now 1-5 in their last 6 games. That would be the Wisconsin Badgers. They were in the top 4 seeds in the bracket reveal on Saturday. They since lost to Iowa. You think Wisconsin's officially cooked?
Yeah, in terms of making the tournament not even close, in terms of being a team that I would take seriously in March to make the second weekend, frankly, Sean, they might be one of the most popular upset picks you will see on like a 5-12, or even if they drop to a 6-11 game, 4-13, doesn't matter. The way they played has been nothing short of atrocious. And the one game they won was against Ohio State, which we talked about last time. Wasn't like a win technically, but realistically, not really. And I mean, Sean, this has been a theme we've talked about for the last 2 weeks on this podcast, saying, "Oh, this won't last." Especially after the Michigan game, we've chalked it up to, like after the Nebraska Purdue losses. Oh, this is the game they get back on track. And even then, we said, "Well, there's no way they could actually lose to Rutgers." Rutgers wiped them off the floor. It looked like Wisconsin. They went at number 11. It looked like Rutgers was the number 11 team in that game, which is asinine. So, Sean, with all that said, for Wisconsin. There's nothing that makes me believe that they'll go into Assembly Hall next Tuesday and win. I'm going to have to assume they're going to beat Maryland. Vegas has them favored by 7.5, 8 right now. But then again, Maryland's a team. I mean, they won at Illinois this year. They're 14-12. They're certainly not good. They certainly won't be in the tourney. They might be on the NIT cut line. If they keep playing the way they played, especially the way they played in the second half against Iowa, yeah, I could see right now the snowball's huge, but it can get bigger, and that's not a good thing. Sean, I'm going to get right back to you.
Yeah, the Maryland game you said is next. They should win that. They go to Indiana on the road. They host Illinois. They host a Rutgers team that, as you previously mentioned, smoked them, and then they go to Mackey Arena. I mean, that is a tough 4 games after the really tough 5 games. You have one game that you're probably definitely going to win in there, and you probably will beat Rutgers too, but it's not where you want to be if you're Wisconsin right now. I do have them on the 5. We'll get to them after we talk about one more thing, but there were signs of them not really getting after it defensively, but shots were going down, and they were getting a big lead, so they get a 10-point lead and win by 12. It was all good there, but when shots aren't falling, anybody can beat them right now. I think I would pick almost every 12 seed over them with how good the 12 seeds are this year. But disappointed for Wisconsin, because it looked like they had a real chance to win the Big Ten title before things kind of turned for the worse. The last thing we'll get to, Joe, before bracketology.
Sean,
or go ahead, Joe.
On that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, that's thing for Wisconsin too. You thought they would flip the narrative from being a team that last year they barely missed the tournament. Really, the last 2 years, last 2 seasons, they've just been a far cry from what they were. Even in 21-22, I understand they got upset by Iowa State. They were a 3 seed, Sean, and we thought they'd return to being like a top 20 team going to March consistently, and that's just not happened. So, really disappointed for them and really disappointed for their fan base because I think that they were led to believe, and rightfully so, they were led to believe in January that they were a top 10 team, and to not even be perhaps a top 20 seed in this tournament, and frankly might not even be a top 25 team. That's really disappointing.
But yeah, they are out of the rankings now, Joe. So only 2 teams in the Big Ten are ranked. Tough look for the Badgers. I think we are officially past the point of it's okay to go through some struggles. I think in the end of January, early February, that's when you kind of want to maybe go through something. That's what UConn did last year. But it's the middle of February, Joe. There's 5 or 6 games left before the Big Ten tournament. You got to be firing on all cylinders at this point. One last headline today, Joe, that came through the news was Kanye Cleary announced that he was either left or was dismissed from the program in Penn State. Not sure there's much more details on that. He was injured. He tried to come back. Tough blow for the Nittany Lions, who I think have, done better than what we could have expected. And Kanye Cleary was probably someone who's headed for an all-conference selection. Any thoughts on this blow for the Nittany Lions?
Yeah, Sean, a few weeks ago we predicted the bottom four. I think this all but seals it for the Nittany Lions, unfortunately. Um, I think this maybe puts a little sour on their season. Not that anyone's going to look back at this year as anything other than a rebuilding year, but they're really only one game out of being like a top 8 seed in the Big Ten tournament. Statistically, realistically, I don't think people expected that. But with that said, I think they're probably primed to play Ohio State in the 12-13 game on Wednesday, and just pretty bummed for them in general because I think they had I think they had Illinois on Wednesday, hosting Indiana, and then I think what little crowd they do get at Bryce Jordan, I think they're going to get next to none now. So just I think for them, the next year's already can't start soon enough. So.
Yeah, Cleary was a holdover from Micah Shrewsbury's time at Penn State. Mike Rhodes clearly did something to persuade him to stay, and we are hearing some conflicting reports whether he left or was dismissed, but I'm at least looking forward to him, maybe putting his name in the transfer portal and seeing where he goes, because there's a team in the Big Ten that I support that desperately needs a type of guard like him. So look out for his name come transfer portal time when some teams start getting eliminated. But tough blow for Penn State. They do host Illinois on Wednesday at 6:30. And, Joe, this game is going to be played in Rec Hall at Penn State, not Bryce Jordan. So an interesting development. It's sort of a field house, I guess, 7,000.
The volleyball team plays there, which no jokes, like even trying to be made here. Penn State volleyball and wrestling are consistently our top sports. So, hopefully that attracts some appeal, but I doubt it'll do much.
Yeah, well, it is a small arena, so it'll seem full-ish, 6,000-7,000, which is, 6,000-7,000 is the capacity of the RAC, which is one of the toughest places to play in the Big Ten. So, Joe, we're going to head to bracketology. I did fill one out earlier today. We'll throw it up on the screen now for the YouTube listeners. The Spotify listeners just going to have to go over to the Instagram to check it out. As I said earlier, Purdue dropped from number 1 overall to number 2 overall. Won't change much other than the 2 seed that will be in their bracket. They're still going to go to Indy. They're still going to go to Detroit if they make it that far. The next team in the Big Ten, Illinois, the first 4 seed, looking pretty good and having a chance to get a share of the title. Wisconsin drops to the 5 line. Now they are set in the 4th spot, but that's for bracketing rules. They're somewhere in that range. And then after that, Michigan State up to the 7 seed. Seems like they're kind of peaking, Joe. They're beating teams that they should beat. They're separating themselves from the middle of the pack. They have the big wins against Illinois, Baylor. And then we've got Northwestern as the second 9 seed. Good away win for them yesterday at Assembly Hall, despite Boo Buie and Brooks Barnheiser not doing much. And then you have Nebraska as the last 10 seed, 2 spots away from the first 4 games. Them in Butler, Indiana State is an automatic qualifier, so they cannot be in the first 4. And then after that, Joe, there is not a team that is anywhere close to the bubble other than those 6. So unless something crazy happens, those will be the 6 that are going dancing from the Big Ten.
Yeah, Sean, I think Nebraska is probably the first thing everyone's asked about and will ask about. So I'm going to try to paraphrase all these questions into one. I think we kind of touched on this with Northwestern after they lost Ty Berry. And looking at Nebraska's upcoming schedule, they don't play anyone who's going to make the tournament. I mean, nobody. Nebraska plays Indiana, Minnesota, Ohio State, Rutgers, and Michigan. Those are teams scattered at the wrong half of the conference. With that said, Sean, so they have, 5 games left, and three of those are on the road. What road games between Indiana, Ohio State, and Michigan can they not lose?
You probably want 2 of them, right? And we've, a lot of teams, Purdue, 3 road losses in this conference, 2 of them to tournament teams. You really just want to lose road games to tournament teams because, and chances are you've probably got 3 road games against, all three of these teams could be playing on Wednesday, Joe. So good opportunity for victories here. They do have just one true road win, and that is against Kansas State. Unfortunately for them, Kansas State not the team that a lot of us expected. And then you've got some teams that are not going to make the tournament at home. There's a realistic scenario where they win out, and they probably don't have to, but you do need a couple of road wins because you only have one so far, and you only have one loss at home, and that's to Creighton. But getting a couple of these road wins will take them away from the bubble and towards that 8-9 range, which you might not want if you're a Nebraska fan, but better to be there than to be sweating it out on Selection Sunday.
Absolutely. Sean, and again, this is not great for the conference, but it's been a constant theme we've been seeing since no one's that good. Michigan State, we all talk about the game at Mackey. Favored by 10 against Iowa tomorrow, has Ohio State at home on Sunday, at Purdue, Northwestern at home, and then at Assembly Hall. The tone on this has changed, though, quite a bit, because before the Illinois game, Sean, we were talking about them squarely on the bubble. Now, I think it would take a total collapse, like probably losing out to not make the tournament. With that said, Sean, they're still in the 7-10 purgatory. That's what we call it. What's going to get them to a 6 realistically? Because let's assume they're going to lose at Purdue. Do they have to win for their last 5, including one at Assembly Hall?
That still might not be enough, Joe. You got to break a lot of. You got to do a lot of things to break into that 6 seed range. You see teams like South Carolina, BYU, Texas Tech in there. Those teams have really high profile road games on their resume. Like South Carolina beat Tennessee, and then just BYU has had a ton of good wins in the Big 12. You need that one at Mackey to get to the 6 seed range if you're Michigan State. You probably need to go 3-2 the rest of the way to stay where you are. Ideally you'd want to beat Iowa and Ohio State at home, and then probably get 2 of your last 3, whether it's at Purdue, home to Northwestern, or at Indiana. So they're looking good. They are probably headed for a 7 seed, and now at this point, I think if you're Michigan State, you're more looking at the Big Ten standings, because if you get enough wins to get to that double bye, which they're tied for 3rd right now with Wisconsin or Northwestern, and they're 5th on a tiebreaker, I think if you get yourself to the double bye, it's good because you won't need more games. You won't be around the bubble. You won't need more games. So I think other than a win at Mackey or a 1-4 finish, I don't think they're moving a whole lot because, like we said, 7-10 range, really, really close. But once you get to that 6 seed range, that's when you have a lot of solid teams with a bunch of road wins and 60% of their wins, winning 60% of their games in their conference and stuff like that.
Sean, I'm gonna ask you one pretty complicated question, so I'll re-explain it if you need me to. Of Wisconsin, Michigan State, and Nebraska, because I'm assuming Purdue is pretty safe in the ones, as we talked about earlier. Illinois, hard-pressed to believe they dropped from being a top 4, top 16 team. Of those 3, who can't afford the drop? In terms of not making the tournament, but in terms of just everything combined. Would that be Wisconsin simply because they're falling from such heights from like a top, 2 or 3 seed and perhaps even to a 7?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we keep saying that these 11, 12, and 13 seeds are really good, and they're going to be begging for Wisconsin. That's where we're at. These other 5 seeds are, Kentucky just crushed Auburn on the road. Clemson, who won at North Carolina. Then you have Dayton, who's killed everybody in the A-10, and they hung with Houston back in November. Like, Wisconsin is miles below those teams right now. And unfortunately, fortunately for them, the work that they've done earlier in the year will get them a better seed than they're probably playing right now. But if you get to a 7 seed, if you're Wisconsin, I don't think a 5 to a 7 really changes much in terms of your first round game. You're going to be playing teams pretty much around the same spot. whether it's a 10 seed, an 11 seed, or a 12 seed. That's why the 4 seeds, everyone makes such a big deal about the protected seeds because typically after the 12 seeds, the level of competition really drops off. Now, the 13 seeds are decent this year, but there are very few chances that all of the 12 seeds on there and all of the 13 seeds win. If a couple of the 12 seeds lose, well, then those good 13 seeds will be 12s. So that's why that's the case. But there's a big drop-off after 12, and not much of it. Like, those 10 to 12 seeds, I think, are pretty similar teams. You got top mid-major teams with high-power transfers, or you have power conference teams who have at least shown that they could be good teams, which is the reason why they're in the tournament.
Yeah, Sean, one last question from Kyle, who's a Northwestern fan. He's been begging for this, and I don't know why. It's not just to taunt me. Sean, if Northwestern straight up loses to Michigan on Thursday, are they out of the tournament? So, Sean, you was the third 9, I believe.
I mean, it's hard to erase. It's hard for one game to mean so much at this point in the year. We did see Indiana State lose quad 3 to quad 4 game, and they only went down like a seed line. They probably ruined their chances at that large, but no, I don't think so. I mean, Michigan's still a quad 2 at home. I think. What are they in the low 100s in the net, something like that?
Yeah.
So yeah, no. I mean, they're the only way that Northwestern typically could miss the tournament is if they go like 2-3 the rest of the way, and then a loss to a non-tournament team in the Big Ten tournament. But they're too good for that to happen. I know Ty Berry being out hurts, but they controlled the game from minute 1 to minute 40 at Assembly Hall yesterday, so not too worried about Northwestern.
No, and Sean, I think this is something I ask you every week, and unfortunately for the conference, it never changes. Of the teams that are not the 6, so not Purdue, Illinois, Wisconsin, Northwestern, Michigan State, and Nebraska. So the top 6 teams, funnily enough, in the conference are going to make the tournament. Who of the last 8 has any outside chance at the tournament? And frankly, I think none, but what do you say? You're better.
It is none, Joe. So then it turns into a who do you think can win the Big Ten tournament? And I don't know if any team has shown, other than Purdue in the entire conference, that they could win 4 games in a row. So if you're a fan of one of those teams, try and talk yourself into it, because that's kind of all it's going to be.
Yeah, and Sean, I think if I'll just make you pick here, the only team I can even think of, and this is probably, I put this at a 2 to 5% chance of happening, so 1 in 50 or 1 in 20, Iowa, just because of their offense, and that's not said with any degree of confidence. That's simply because maybe they just win 4 games in a row, scoring 100 points. And
they do get Illinois twice, with Michigan State on the roads and Northwestern on the roads. So if they went out, then maybe they put themselves in the conversation. They do have a win over Seton Hall in non-con. Well, they did get swept by Michigan, so.
Swept. No.
They won on the road, lost at home to Michigan.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe if they win out, but I'm gonna answer the question that I switched it to, Joe, and the team that I think can win the Big Ten tournament. That's not there. I'm going with Rutgers. They have been much, much better since Jeremiah Williams has been, approved or allowed to play. They did lose a tough one at the barn yesterday. They got Purdue on the road if they can somehow find a way to win that. They got Wisconsin on the road, Nebraska on the road. If they win out, maybe they don't have to win the Big Ten tournament, but we're getting to we're 80% of the way through the season. Teams are what they are. And maybe a team pulls a Georgetown COVID tournament run out, but I don't see it. So if you're one of those teams, start getting ready for next year, because highly unlikely that something like that happens. So, Joe, I think...
Sean, I think
go ahead.
That was it for questions about bracketology this week.
Yep, that's all we have.
I think that wrapped it up for bracketology questions this week. Yeah.
that's all we have from today. Thank you everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next time.